Okay, today's lesson is going to be solving one-step equations that contain fractions or rational numbers. We've already done the warm-up and explained it in class. So here's just going to show you the solution, so if you're doing this at home, you can check your work. Alright, so our objective today is to learn how to solve one-step equations that are going to contain fractions. So we are going to write the answer in simplest form after we solve this. So remember, we talked about the concept of inverse operations. So locate the variable. In problem solving, all problem solving, your goal is to isolate the variable. You want to get it on one side of the equal sign by itself. You're going to use inverse operations to do that. So x is being subtracted by 3/7, which means we use the inverse of addition to add 3/7 to both sides. So you can add 3/7. Now that's the additive inverse. Remember that subtracting 3/7 is like plus a negative. So a negative 3/7 plus 3/7 is equal to 0. It cancels it from the left-hand side with the variable. And then since it already has a common denominator, we simply add the numerators and then simplify. So 1 and 1/7. Okay, let's try this one. 3/4 plus y is equal to 1/8. In this case, we are still going to use the additive inverse. We've noticed that the fraction is first. It's a positive. So we're going to subtract on both sides to isolate the variable. Now, the one on the left, 3/4 minus 3/4, cancels out to 0, and y is left by itself. On the right, 1/8 minus 3/4, we have to first get the lowest common denominator between 8 and 4, which is 8. So get the common denominator. Then you could do subtraction and get a negative 5/8. And again, you could always substitute it back in for y and check your work. Okay, that's talking about that additive inverse. So it's the opposite of 3/4. So you always look at the sign of the number and then use the opposite when doing these types of problems. All right, 5/12 plus t is equal to a negative 3/8. So we got to isolate t by subtracting 5/12 from both sides. Find the common denominator and rewrite both fractions so that t will be equal to a negative 9/24 minus 10/24. So a negative 9 minus 10 is a negative 19/24. X minus 3/8 is equal to 7/8. Again, you are undoing subtraction, right? So we want to add in 3/8 to both sides. And it's much easier when we have a common denominator, and we can simplify. Let's look at another very similar example. We want to isolate y, so we'll subtract 3/8 from both sides. We will get a common denominator. So 2 minus 3, the answer will be a negative 1/8. Okay, another example. We are going to subtract 3/14 from both sides. We'll get a common denominator. And then we'll subtract and simplify. Okay, in this example, we still want to write our answer in simplest form, but we have to look at the variable. It's on the left-hand side. And it's being multiplied to 3/8. So what in this case we are actually undoing multiplication. You guys know this to be you undo multiplication with division. So if we're going to divide a fraction by a fraction, we are actually going to be multiplying that fraction by its reciprocal. So if we multiply both sides of the equation by the reciprocal of 3/8, it turns into 1. It's the identity property on the left. And then we have 1/4 times 8/3. So, step by step, to undo multiplying by 3/8, you divide by 3/8, or simply multiply by its reciprocal. So that's kind of important to know. So that's usually how we show our work in simplifying these types of problems. Because the 3's will cancel out on the left, the 8's will cancel out, we'll be left with x by itself, that's isolating the variable. Then for multiplying the fractions on the right, 1 times 8 over 4 times 3. You can cross cancel before you multiply to get your solution of x is equal to 2/3. All right, 4x is equal to 8/9. Again, you're going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of 4, or you're dividing both sides by 4. So when you have 8/9 divided by 4, remember that you have to take 8/9 times 1/4 because it's the reciprocal. So you show your work, multiply both sides by the reciprocal, simplify, and multiply. Three-fourths of x is equal to 1/2. So we want to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of 3/4. And then we can simplify before we multiply. And again, keep in mind that if any of these were negative, then you would have to evaluate the integer. Three x is equal to 6/7. Again, we want to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of 3. Because that's what you'll do after you divide both sides by 3. So if you take 6/7 divided by 3, you end up taking 6/7 times 1/3. You can simplify and then multiply. Okay, here's an additional example. So the amount of copper in brass is 3/4 of the total weight. If a sample contains 4.5 ounces of copper, what is the total weight? So you'd want to first represent the problem and write an equation. You'd have 3/4 of W because the word of will indicate multiplication, so 3/4 times W, which is the total weight. So when you have a mixed number in a problem like this, remember you're going to want to change it improper because you're going to be multiplying both sides by the reciprocal of 3/4. So you have to change 4 1/5 into an improper fraction. You can simplify. And then put your answer back into a mixed number.